The chamber of the Galactic Council was a cathedral of glass and void, orbiting a pale blue giant in the KLYSS expanse. Its walls shimmered with translucent alloys that revealed a storm-racked horizon beyond, clouds folding over themselves in endless tides. 43 delegations sat in tiered crescents, each a fragment of the galaxy's fragile diplomacy. Yet the air was thick with one unspoken reality. All eyes were on the Terran representative. Captain Elias Kane stood alone at the central podium. His uniform was plain, matte black, no ornamental flourish, only a silver pin shaped like a fractured globe. His voice, when it came, was steady and unhurried, the kind that made silence gather before every syllable. 3 human colonies have been erased, he said. Not defeated in battle. Erased. Men, women, and children consumed. Their stations left hollow. The Nigma Empire calls it reclamation. We call it murder. A ripple ran through the tiers, the chittering of insectoid vren, the uneasy rustle of the Oshal's feathered mantles. The council had heard reports, but not in this tone. Not as a statement of ledgered fact, but as an indictment. Kane lifted a data slate. With a flick of his thumb, the holographic feed bloomed. Scorched orbitals, spinning debris, drifting corpses encased in ice. There were no screams, the vacuum had stolen those, only the black silence of extinction. He let it hover for a count of 3 heartbeats, then shut it down. Humanity will no longer appeal for restraint, he continued. This is our last communication before action is taken. The United Terran Commonwealth demands that the Nigma Empire cease all expansion beyond their current borders. Withdraw from KLYSS expanse. Return the captured civilians. Deliver those responsible for the massacres. He paused, gaze sweeping the hall. Failure to comply will result in consequences you have neither the means nor the imagination to contain. The council erupted, not with outrage, but with the desperate noise of those who smelled war bleeding through the doors. A Kelleran senator hissed, "You would threaten genocide?" Another, a lithe serpentine diplomat from Tarwisis, whispered to her peers, "They will do it. The Terrans have a history." Kane said nothing. Threats were noise. The message was already sent. From the upper dais, the council speaker, an ancient being of mottled silver carapace known as Israel, struck the resonance plate. The Terran envoy has spoken. The Nigma Empire is entitled to respond. The central dais shimmered again, and a projection coalesced. Over Queen Ziran Kal, her towering form a chitinous pillar wreathed in bioluminescent strands. Compound eyes reflected the chamber like shards of oil. Her mandibles flexed with amusement rather than alarm. "Humans," she said, her voice a layered resonance that seemed to crawl across the listeners' spines. "You speak as if your fledgling kind commands the void. You are soft creatures born of mud, still tasting your first centuries among the stars. We harvest where we please. We devour the weak. And you," her mandibles clicked, a sound like knives against stone, "you will either kneel or you will feed our broods." A hush fell. Even the most neutral species shifted uneasily. Kane inclined his head slightly, but his tone did not shift. "This is your answer? It is the only one you will hear," Zira hissed. "Your ultimatum is a meal to us. We accept it." The projection dissolved, leaving only the whisper of static. For a moment, the council sat frozen. It was Israel who finally broke the stillness. "Captain Kane, do you wish to withdraw your statement?" "No," Kane said, turning away from the podium. "Transmit it. Every word. Unaltered." Hours later, the Terran delegation prepared to depart. Their vessel, Vigilant Dawn, hung in low orbit like a blade angled toward the stars. Kane stood in the airlock vestibule, the blue giant flooding the chamber with cold light. His adjutant, Lieutenant Merrick Voss, joined him, voice low. "You think they'll yield?" Kane looked out into the void. "No. But now the council knows we asked." Voss exhaled through his teeth, the sound more a hiss than a sigh. "They'll call this reckless. They called it reckless when we fortified Mars. They called it reckless when we stopped the KRYL swarm at Anor Reach. They always do, until it saves them." The docking clamps disengaged with a dull shudder, and the ship slid free. Behind them, the council chamber dwindled, a glimmering hub of hesitation. Ahead, the KLYSS expanse stretched, uncharted lanes, contested mining belts, the bleeding edge of civilization. 3 days after departure, the transmission arrived. It was not a reply. It was a broadcast. Unencrypted. Blunt. The Nigma Empire claimed responsibility for the destruction of Trelvo Station, a mid-tier Terran colony hub. They displayed trophies, shattered hulls, drifting lifeboats clawed open, survivors reduced to husks. The message concluded with a single phrase, repeated in the Nigma tongue, then translated across every human channel. Harvest complete. More to come. Kane read it once, then again, his knuckles whitening around the slate. The bridge was silent, the crew watching him without looking directly. Outside the viewport, the stars were cold and indifferent. He keyed the intercom. Set course for Trelvo's debris field. Full burn. Voss hesitated. Captain, the Council. The Council will deliberate while we count our dead, Kane cut in, voice even but stripped of any softness. Set the course. Trelvo Station was no longer a station. It was a skeletal ring broken into 5 drifting segments, each still trailing the faint haze of escaping atmosphere. Rescue beacons blinked weakly, their signals distorted by the radiation left in the Nigma fleet's wake. Kane stepped into the docking umbilical. His boots clanged on scorched alloy as the blast doors cycled open. Inside, the air stank of melted plastic and cold metal. A child's toy floated past, a simple sphere with painted continents, spinning lazily. A survivor staggered from a darkened corridor, wrapped in emergency foil. Her face was hollow, eyes wide and rimmed with frostbite. She saw Kane, and for a moment seemed unsure if he was real. They didn't take prisoners, she whispered. They fed the living to the brood vats. Then they left. Kane said nothing. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder and signaled for medics. Around them, teams catalogued the dead. Hundreds of bodies frozen mid-flight, hands outstretched toward doors that never opened. No alarms now. No frantic messages. Only the echo of something that had once been a home. Back aboard Vigilant Dawn, Kane stood alone in the strategy room, the wreckage mapped across a holographic field. He traced a finger along the projected lines of the Nigma advance. It formed a net, slow, deliberate, and aimed at the Terran frontier. Voss entered, a data chip in hand. Orders from High Command. They want you back on Earth for consultation. Kane studied the map for a long moment. Then he shut it down, the stars folding into darkness. Tell them I'll attend, he said quietly. But they won't like my advice. Voss hesitated. What will it be? Kane's gaze hardened. The same as always. We ask once. Then we act. Outside, the K-Oasis expanse rolled on, a sea of cold suns and unmarked graves. The ultimatum had been delivered. The answer had been given. The line between war and survival had begun to blur. The wreckage of Trelvo Station still drifted like an open wound when the Vigilant Dawn departed. Behind it, emergency crews and salvage vessels combed the ruins, pulling what little remained of lives once lived in orbit. Ahead, the Terran flagship cut a silent path toward Earth, carrying survivors and grim evidence of the massacre. Captain Elias Kane stood at the bridge viewport, arms folded. The stars offered no answers, only the same indifferent tapestry they always had. His reflection in the glass looked older than the man who had addressed the council a week ago. The sharpness in his gaze had not dulled, but something colder had taken root behind it. Lieutenant Merrick Voss approached. The survivors are stable. 27 accounted for out of 6,000. Med teams say most won't last the month. Kane didn't look away from the stars. Did she speak again? She's sedated. Trauma's deep. Voss hesitated, then added, the story is the same across the decks. They were herded, processed, and left to rot. The Nigmas didn't even strip the station for parts. This was a message. Kane nodded once. He already knew. Every action the Nigma Empire had taken in the past decade carried that signature. Precise cruelty, always leaving something behind for their enemies to find. The War Council convened 2 days later in the subterranean heart of Luna Prime. The room was circular, carved from black basalt and ringed with silent strategists, admirals, and ministers. Kane entered without ceremony, carrying only a single chip of recorded evidence. The images from Trelvo's. High Admiral Soren Valchek, a broad man with weathered features, gestured to the central table. You've seen the wreckage firsthand. We've all read your report. Speak. Kane placed the chip into the slot. The hologram bloomed. Frozen bodies, ruptured bulkheads, empty corridors lit by dying emergency beacons. No one in the chamber spoke as the display cycled through each deck. When the projection faded, Kane's voice filled the silence. This is not a border raid. This is extermination doctrine. They leave no infrastructure, no resistance, only fear. Minister Hale, ever cautious, adjusted his collar. And yet you delivered a formal ultimatum only days before this occurred. Some in the council suggest the attack was provoked by that message. Kane turned his gaze on him, level and unblinking. We warned them to stop. They answered with slaughter. You call that provocation? I call it prelude. The room shifted uneasily. Valchek leaned forward. What's your assessment of their intent? Expansion, as always, Kane said. But this time with a singular purpose. To break us before we mobilize. The KLYSS expanse is a choke point. If they secure it, they own every outer corridor between Sol and the far Orion clusters. Hale frowned. You're asking us to go to war. Kane didn't blink. I'm telling you we're already in one. After the council dismissed, Kane lingered in the corridor outside, the cold artificial light outlining the lines on his face. Voss caught up with him, holding a sealed data slate. Orders. Kane took it without opening. A meeting with the executive triarch. I imagine they'll want me to soften the message for the civilian assembly. And will you? Voss asked. No. They walked together through the sterile halls, the hum of distant reactors vibrating underfoot. Soldiers passed with the measured steps of men who had read the same reports, who knew that the images circulating in encrypted networks were only the beginning. That evening, Kane found himself on the observation deck overlooking the Mare Serenitatis. Earth hung above the lunar horizon, serene and distant. A faint auroral band shimmered across its surface, a reminder of home, and of what was at stake. A voice came from behind him. You still believe in warnings? Kane didn't turn. Sometimes they buy time. Executive Triarch Alina Dreyer stepped beside him, her formal robes trimmed with silver thread. Her gaze was sharp, not unkind, but weighted with the burden of civilian governance. The council is divided. Half want full mobilization. Half want to negotiate again, through intermediaries this time. And you? She studied Earth for a long moment. I want the killing to stop, but I know them as you do. They won't stop unless they are forced. Kane finally looked at her. Then stop asking how much it will cost. Start asking what it will cost if we wait. Dreyer exhaled slowly, a faint fog in the chilled air. You'll have your mandate. But understand this. Once you start, there may be no going back. Kane turned back to the blue planet. There never was. Within 48 hours, the first covert orders were issued. Recon fleets redeployed. Outer ring defenses activated dormant platforms. Civilian newsfeed spoke of heightened readiness, but the classified channels carried the true weight: authorization for preemptive deterrence operations. Voss handed Kane a fresh packet in the command suite of Vigilant Dawn. They want a final envoy mission. One more meeting with the Overqueen's war chamber. Deliver terms face to face. Kane scanned the directive. It wasn't a request. It was a chance for history to record that humanity had tried. He set the packet down. When? He asked. 6 days. Neutral station on the Helix corridor. Kane nodded. Then that's where we go. Voss studied him. You think they'll listen? Kane allowed a thin, humorless smile. No. But when the record is written, no one will say we stayed silent. The next morning, before departure, Kane walked the quiet rows of the Luna Memorial Gallery. It was a corridor of glass cases and engraved plinths, each marking a war humanity had survived. The Europa siege, the Anor Reach, the Kelleran skirmishes. Under dim lights, the etched names seemed endless. He paused before a new section. Blank. Waiting. Soon it would bear the names of Trelvos. How many more would follow? A maintenance officer passed, saluting instinctively. Kane returned it, though his mind was already elsewhere. He imagined the chitinous fleets assembling in the dark, their brood worlds pulsing with hatcheries, their overqueen certain that humanity would bend as others had. He whispered to the empty hall, "You've mistaken our patience for weakness." Then he turned and left. On the day of departure, the vigilant dawn launched under strict radio silence. No banners, no broadcasts. Just a quiet burn through the dark. The survivors of Trelvos slept in cryostasis aboard a separate hospital convoy, bound for the Soul Belt, their lives uncertain but spared for now. Kane stood on the command deck, hands clasped behind his back. Voss approached, adjusting his headset. Coordinates locked. We'll arrive at the Helix corridor in 4 days. Kane's eyes stayed fixed on the starlines stretching ahead. For days to give them one last chance to live. And if they don't take it? Kane's answer was a whisper, almost to himself. Then we teach them why the galaxy fears us. Outside, the stars flared into streaks as the ship entered slipstream, the hum of its drive steady and cold. Behind them, Trelvos lay silent, a grave in orbit. Ahead, the path to war narrowed to a single point of decision. The clock had started. The Helix corridor was a graveyard of forgotten treaties. Once a thriving trade hub, now its only pulse came from the neutral station that drifted in its heart. A vast, ring-shaped construct of tarnished alloys, operated by an order of impartial archivists who claimed to serve peace but had long since learned to sell neutrality. The vigilant dawn arrived first. Captain Elias Kane disembarked with a small escort, no more than protocol demanded, and a single case containing the final terms from the United Terran Commonwealth. His expression gave nothing away as the station's automated greeters scanned his credentials. "Docking clearance granted," a hollow voice chimed. "Your meeting will convene in Chamber 12. Kane gave a curt nod. "Keep the room secure. No recording devices beyond what I authorize." The greeter made no protest. Neutrality, here, meant compliance to whoever arrived armed. The chamber was stark, cold walls, a single table of obsidian glass, and seats designed for species with differing anatomies. Kane took his place at the human side and waited. His aide, Lieutenant Voss, stood to his left, fingers flexing slightly at the sidearm he had not been permitted to carry. "They're late," Voss muttered. "They're observing," Kane replied. "They want us to feel the weight of their time." The door hissed open. Overqueen Zirin Kal did not come in person. She would not risk her brood flesh this far from her hives, but her highest war larva did, a towering figure encased in layered chitin, flanked by 2 smaller attendants. Its mandibles clicked as it approached, compound eyes gleaming with the reflection of the station's lights. "Kane of Earth," the war larva rasped, "you carry words you think matter." Kane gestured to the case. "I carry the last chance your empire will be offered." The war larva seated itself with a creak of carapace. "Then speak your threat." "Not a threat," Kane said. "A choice. Withdraw from the KLYSS expanse. Return our civilians. End your harvests. Do this, and humanity will step back." The war larva's mandibles spread in what passed for mirth. "Step back? You will crawl. You issue ultimatums as if the void belongs to your kind." Voss leaned forward. "You've seen what our fleets can do when provoked." The alien turned its gaze on him, unblinking. "We have seen your colonies burn." Kane's tone sharpened. "And you will see your brood starve if this continues." For a moment, the room held stillness like a blade poised above a throat. The war larva leaned in. "You come here with words, but your eyes carry war. You think your kind is different? You build your walls, hoard your worlds, whisper of peace until your guns are ready. We smell the change in you, Kane of Earth. You are not here to bargain. You are here to measure our throats." Kane did not deny it. "I am here to ensure history records that humanity offered peace." The alien hissed, a dry rasp. "And history will record that we refused." When the meeting ended, no documents were signed. The Nigma envoy departed first, its guards trailing a slick of organic secretion on the metallic floor. As the doors sealed, Voss exhaled through clenched teeth. "That was a waste." "It was confirmation," Kane said, collecting the unused datapad. Voss followed as they left the chamber. "They won't yield. They never intended to." Kane's voice held no surprise. "Now we have their answer. In person on record." Hours later, As the Terran delegation prepared to depart the station, the ambush came. A maintenance drone scuttled along the docking tube, innocuous among dozens like it, until its casing split open and a tendril of living chitin uncoiled, sprouting barbs glistening with neurotoxin. A hidden Nigma operative, one of the war larva's attendants left behind, lunged from the shadows, striking at Kane's chest. The world narrowed to a breath. Kane twisted, the blade grazing his coat, slicing fabric but missing the flesh beneath. Voss fired once, a flash of blue-white plasma in the confined corridor, and the attacker collapsed in a hiss of steaming ichor. "Move!" Kane barked, shoving the stunned crew back toward the airlock. The drone detonated a second later, not with fire but with corrosive vapor that ate through alloy like acid. Bulkhead sealed just in time. Back aboard the Vigilant Dawn, the captain stripped the burned coat from his shoulders and handed it to an ensign. His face was calm, but his eyes were steel. "Send the footage to Luna Prime," he ordered. "Mark it as proof of Nigma intent." Voss shook his head. "They lured us here to kill you." "No," Kane corrected. "They lured us here to try." That night, in the low glow of the ship's strategy room, Kane stared at the projected map of the KLYSS expanse. The Nigma fleet positions were estimates, the void between them crawling with unverified signatures. Every week the lines shifted, and with each shift, more human trade routes fell under threat. Voss entered, carrying 2 steaming cups. "Command's response?" Kane took one cup, letting the heat soak his fingers. "They've had enough. Mobilization orders were signed an hour ago." Voss raised an eyebrow. "So this was the last word?" Kane nodded. "The last offer. Now it's mathematics." The Vigilant Dawn broke slipspace 3 days later at the edge of a Terran fleet yard. Hundreds of warships floated in formation, spearhead destroyers, heavy cruisers, carriers with hulls like fortress walls. Docking arms fed them with munitions. Drone swarms laced their void plating with ablative nets. It was not a fleet preparing to defend. It was a fleet poised to move. On the main screen, High Admiral Valchek appeared, his expression grim. "You delivered the message?" "They refused," Kane replied. "And they tried to make sure I didn't bring back their refusal." Valchek gave a slow nod. "Then the Council will have no more doubts." Kane's gaze lingered on the distant warships. "No more delays, either." That evening, Kane stood alone in his quarters, looking at a photograph affixed to the inner wall. His sister and her children, taken before they'd been stationed at Trelvos. Their fates were no longer a question. He slid the photo back into its frame and locked the case. The transmission he sent to the Council was brief. Final negotiation failed. Prepare for operational authorization. 2 days later, as the Terran fleets began their silent advance toward the Nigma frontier, the first encrypted directives reached Kane's ship. Target lists, strike priorities, contingency for brood-world sterilization. The war he had warned of was no longer theoretical. Voss stepped into the command deck, datapad in hand. "Orders." Kane closed the star map. "We move with the first spearhead. Coordinate with Valchek's flagship." Voss hesitated. "And if the Council hesitates again?" "They won't," Kane said. "Not after Trelvos. Not after Helix." He turned to the viewing port, where the black of space was lit by the faint glow of engine trails forming a slow, inevitable tide. "They had their chance," he murmured. "Now we take ours." As the fleet prepared to leave dock, the message from the Nigma Empire spread across open channels. Translated into 100 dialects, unfiltered, "The harvest begins. Terrans will fall like the others." Kane watched the transmission once, then deleted it. "Let them think that," he said quietly to himself. "It will make the silence hit harder." Outside, the stars wheeled on, cold and unblinking. The last attempt at peace was over. The ledger was open. The first strike began before dawn touched the Terran capital. There was no grand declaration, no banners on broadcasts, only encrypted orders rippling across slipspace. Initiate Operation Iron Veil. By the time the galaxy's neutral networks caught the whisper, 3 Nigma outposts were already gone. Captain Elias Kane stood in the war room of the Vigilant Dawn, surrounded by officers charting the kill zones. Red markers flared across the holographic sector map, each a destroyed broodhive or shredded convoy. Human fleets moved like shadows, silent, precise, erasing supply lines before the Nigma High Command could react. Lieutenant Merrick Voss approached, datapad in hand. 4th Spearhead reports success at Harrow Rift. 0 survivors. Kane studied the map. And their retaliation? Scattered. Disorganized. They expected a wall. We gave them knives. He nodded. Keep it that way. Cut deep. Move faster than they can adapt. In the outer corridors of the KLYSS expanse, the war unfolded with relentless efficiency. Terran hunter-killer units used micro-jump tactics, brief bursts across micro-lanes, to bypass fortresses and strike at brood nodes. Autonomous war drones, no larger than a human skull, infiltrated their hives and released engineered plagues that devoured chitin and left structures hollow. Alien observers, watching from the edge of neutral space, transmitted hushed reports. The humans do not conquer. They erase. On the 6th day, a captured Nigma transmission reached the Terran command network. It was a frantic message, half corrupted by interference. Brood larvae screaming, hive structures collapsing, commands dissolving into static. Voss replayed it on the bridge. They're folding faster than we expected. Kane's expression did not shift. Because they built their empire on terror, not resilience. Terror collapses when it's matched. Voss hesitated. Some are calling this excessive. Kane turned to face him fully. Excessive would be waiting until they reached Sol. Aboard the Vigilant Dawn, the command deck vibrated as a fleet of Terran dreadnoughts executed a synchronized slip jump into the Nigma heart sector. Outside the viewport, a vast brood world loomed, black and violet, its surface a writhing sea of living structures. Admiral Valchek's voice came through the fleet-wide channel. Objective confirmed. Breeding Moon Alth Cryon. Authorization. Sterilization. Kane issued the command without hesitation. Deploy imploders. Columns of silvery capsules streaked toward the moon. Upon impact, they released silent pulses. Not explosions, but collapses. Structures crumpled inward. Biomass turned to dust. Oceans boiled without flame. In under an hour, the planet's hatching fields were inert. No Terran soldier set foot on the surface. There was nothing left to occupy. Word of the destruction spread. Species that had once mocked Terran caution now whispered of their resolve. Kelleran diplomats recalled old border disputes and quietly withdrew. THRYSS merchants rerouted their caravans around human lanes. The galaxy had seen war, but this was something colder. War as arithmetic. At a secure channel, the Galactic Council sent an encrypted plea: cease hostilities. Negotiate surrender terms. Kane read it in silence and forwarded it to High Command. Their answer was a single line: finish what they started. That night, Kane met with his senior officers in the dim-lit strategy hall. Maps hovered over the table, each node a system marked for strike or blockade. The room smelled faintly of ozone from overworked projectors. They're breaking, Voss said. Intercepts show brood queens arguing over retreats. They're animals cornered, Kane replied. Cornered animals bite. One of the captains, a veteran with a scar running across his temple, spoke up. How far do we take this, sir? Brood by brood? Or the home world? Kane met his gaze. We don't leave roots. The officers exchanged a glance, not of doubt, but of grim understanding. As the fleet advanced, resistance grew more desperate. Nigma warships rammed human cruisers, their crews detonating cores rather than surrender. Viral countermeasures swept across Terran networks, forcing engineers to burn entire data clusters to contain the spread. Still, the line moved forward. On the 8th day of the campaign, Kane walked through the medical bay. Rows of injured soldiers lay in stasis fields, their armor melted to their skin from corrosive weaponry. One opened his eyes as Kane passed. Sir, did we win? Kane paused beside him. Not yet. But we will. The soldier managed a faint nod before sedation reclaimed him. Near the border of the Nigma core territories, the final directive arrived. It bore no diplomatic language, no preamble. Just coordinates and a phrase: primary hive. Eliminate. Kane stood before the viewport as the fleet aligned for the jump. Voss joined him, face tight with the weight of what was about to unfold. They'll call this extermination, Voss said. Kane's hands were clasped behind his back. They called it harvest. Do you believe we're still the better side? Kane's eyes stayed fixed on the void. I believe we warned them. The jump tore space like cloth. When the fleet emerged, the Nigma homeworld loomed ahead, a colossal sprawl of bioengineered cities fused with living terrain, its upper atmosphere choked with spore clouds. Defensive fleets swarmed, organic battleships, spined carriers bristling with larval cannons. Terran fire answered them. Railguns spoke in tungsten streaks. EMP shells shredded their formations. Swarms of autonomous drones dove into their hangars and detonated from within. The sky turned white with crossfire, then black with drifting husks. Planetary grid destabilizing, a sensor officer called out. Kane gave the final command. Begin planetary implosion. Target Brood Nexus. From orbit, the Terran fleet launched the second wave, gravity lances and collapsers designed to rupture a planet's living crust. The Nigma homeworld shuddered under the assault, its cities splitting like overripe fruit, its oceans flashing into superheated mist. No parley came. No surrender beacon rose. Only the faint chorus of collapsing hive networks, their psychic signals fragmenting into static. Hours later, the fires still glowed faintly in the dark when Kane convened a brief with Admiral Valchek. It's done, Valchek said. They'll have remnants, stragglers, but no command structure. Kane nodded. Then we finish the remnants. No nests. No revival. Valchek's voice lowered. History will remember this. Kane looked at the ruined sphere, now a silent ember. History remembers survivors. That's why we write it. The fleet did not linger. After final sterilization sweeps, the Terrans withdrew into the void, leaving only empty coordinates where a civilization had stood. Messages flooded the neutral nets, horror from the pacifists, admiration from old rivals, and a single whispered phrase repeated across distant outposts, never provoke the Terrans. In the privacy of his quarters, Kane watched the data feed, grainy footage of the collapsing hive, transmission logs of intercepted panic, the list of Terran casualties, small compared to the war's scale, yet etched into his mind. He closed the file. Voss entered quietly. It's over. Kane didn't turn. No. Now they'll start asking what comes after. Voss hesitated. And what will you tell them? The war ended not with treaties or signatures, but with silence. Entire sectors that once pulsed with Nigma transmissions now broadcast only static. Their supply webs were gone, their brood nodes reduced to ash, their homeworld a drifting carcass lit by the dying embers of orbital strikes. Fleet Admiral Elias Kane stood on the observation deck of the Vigilant Dawn, watching the debris of a civilization scatter like black snow. Reports streamed in, residual spores neutralized. No signs of central command. Remaining signatures, isolated, directionless. Fragmented prey, Lieutenant Voss murmured beside him. They'll never rebuild from this. Kane didn't answer. His gaze stayed on the void, where fragments of a once dominant species drifted without purpose. In the days following the final offensive, the Terran fleet became less a war machine and more a net, sweeping every trace of the Nigma from the peripheries. Recon drones mapped unregistered colonies. Covert strike teams infiltrated their vaults, incinerating genetic caches. The directive remained unchanged. No roots left. For the first time, other civilizations spoke openly. The Archaeal syndicates offered trade corridors. The Varen enclaves, once neutral, pledged non-aggression. Fear, Kane realized, was more persuasive than diplomacy had ever been. But fear carried a shadow. 3 weeks later, a summit convened aboard the orbital fortress throne of glass. Representatives from 12 species attended under heavy surveillance. No banners, no formal ceremony, only a long obsidian table and a view of the shattered star lanes. A Kelleran envoy, its segmented arms folded in strict restraint, spoke first. You've proven your point, Terrans. But the galaxy cannot abide an empire that raises instead of rules. Kane regarded it coolly. We didn't seek an empire. We answered an attack. A THRWSS merchant, scales glittering under the dim lights, leaned forward. And yet, you've created one through absence. Their void is now your shadow. Voss interjected, voice calm but firm. Their void is their making. We left warnings on every channel they ignored. The room quieted. No one contested that. Away from the summit, Kane met with his corps officers in the ship's war council chamber. The lights were low, displays muted, yet the air carried tension. "They're starting to fear what we'll do next," Voss said, hands clasped behind his back. "As they should," Kane replied. "Fear keeps hands steady." Captain Serrano, the scarred veteran from the campaign, frowned. "We've removed the threat. Do we keep grinding the remnants? Or leave them to fade?" Kane considered, then spoke. "A remnant today is a resurgence tomorrow. We finish them, methodically, without spectacle." Serrano nodded. No one disagreed. The remnants fought in scattered shadows, pirate clutches, rogue warbands, queenless hives driven mad by the collapse of their psychic chains. They struck at trade convoys, raided forgotten outposts, poisoned minor moons. Each time, the Terran response was precise and absolute. Track, isolate, eliminate. One such nest, a hidden sphere orbiting a brown dwarf, sent out a desperate plea to neutral channels. "We surrender. We will disarm. We will vanish." High Command's reply was a single packet of coordinates. Kane read it, then issued the order. "Deploy purification team." No witnesses survived to recount what followed. Galactic historians would later debate when extermination became policy. Some argued it was always the plan. Others claimed it was born from the Nigma's refusal to parley after the first strikes. The truth, as Kane saw it, was simpler. Survival had no patience for half measures. In a private conversation, Voss once asked, "Do you think they ever understood why we struck so hard?" Kane's answer was as cold as the void outside the viewport. They understood the moment their first fleet entered Sol space. They just didn't believe we'd follow through. Months passed. The campaign wound down to a final ledger. 417 Nigma worlds sterilized, 112 broodships captured and dismantled, 11 confirmed rogue clusters destroyed. Human losses. Significant, but contained. Civilian sectors never saw invasion again. And yet, whispers grew among Terrans themselves. On distant colonies, citizens questioned the necessity of total erasure. Some called it justice, others retribution. Few spoke of mercy. One night, alone in his quarters, Kane reviewed the archived first warning the Terran Assembly had sent the Nigma Empire. A simple, firm broadcast. "Cease incursions. Do not test our resolve." They had ignored it. They had called it bluff. Now their name was a ghost. The final act of the campaign was not a battle but a sealing. A monument placed in the empty sector where the Nigma homeworld once spun. A silent beacon, broadcasting only a single phrase in every galactic tongue. Here stood the Nigma. Let this void remind you. At the dedication, Voss turned to Kane. "Do you think this will stop others from trying?" Kane gave a faint, tired smile. "No. But it will make them think twice." As the fleet returned to Terran space, the galaxy shifted. Old powers recalculated. Borders moved without wars. Merchants carried Terran seals on their hulls not out of allegiance, but because predators learned to look elsewhere. Humanity had not expanded, it had clarified its perimeter with fire. In a final council report, Kane wrote, "We do not seek dominion. We seek remembrance. Let them remember what wakes when provoked." The report closed with a single line, one that would pass into a dozen alien languages as whispered doctrine. Never provoke the Terrans. The war was over, but its echo stretched like a scar across the stars. Children born a decade later would look at the Nigma void on their star maps and ask, "Who lived there?" And their parents would answer, quietly, "No one. Not anymore."